Welcome to Fine Line Station, where I read out letters and emails sent by you, the listeners. They are real-life stories about the uncanny, the creepy, and the unknown. I am your host, Charlie Fox, and I hope you're ready to tune in. Happy New Year, everyone, and here's to a happy 2025. It's been a pleasure sharing stories with you all, and I look forward to continuing into the year. Today, we have a letter sent in from Liam Wesley. He is from a small country town called Edwardstown and will be sharing his experiences from June 2008. I must admit, it took me a while to figure out where I had heard of that town's name before. I didn't pay much attention to the events playing out as a teenager, but I remember coming across it on a Reddit thread in my early 20s. I am very excited and lucky to hear a first-hand experience of the mass hallucinations that took place in Edwardstown. So with that, let's take a wander through Liam's story. My name is Liam Wesley and I am from Edwardstown. You probably haven't heard of me before, but you might be familiar with my town, or at least what happened to it. In 2008, the Australian government declared all the residents of Edwardstown were suffering from mass hallucinations and hysteria. There were many different reasons given as to why this happened. The official police report claimed it was due to the newly built radio towers and their construction supplies affecting the town's water. It was said that it caused a heightened sense of anxiety, paranoia, insomnia, and triggered people to see hallucinations. The water was tested and there was higher levels of silt and some other chemicals present. Mind you though, when testing the filtered water that came from our taps, the water was at acceptable levels, but they didn't include that in the report. It was enough for them to conclude the investigation, and the construction crew was disbanded and the half-built towers were left to simply stand in the outskirts of town. The supplies were taken away and people got better after it, further confirming the reasoning. And that was that. Our small Edwardstown made the main news and people talked about us for a few weeks until they moved on to whatever else was happening around the country. I have lived in this town my whole life, and it was the same for both my parents and grandparents. Living in a small town always has its ups and downs. Sometimes it can feel a bit claustrophobic. You know everyone and everyone knows you, or at least your family. It can be hard to change as well. People expect you to be a certain way or to act how they last remembered you. But with all the downs, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. We took a school trip to Canberra in high school to see all the government places and whatnot, and I remember being excited to see the shiny city with the many buildings, shops and gardens. We all piled into the bus like a pack of wild animals and were chattering excitedly the whole trip there. When we arrived, we were all slightly speechless. Many of the kids didn't have a chance to visit any of the main cities nearby, mostly due to finances, so it was a big shock when we stepped out into the fancy, at least to us, hotel and the huge buildings surrounding us. At first, the novelty of this new city had us all excited, but as the days went on, we found ourselves exhausted. Not just from visiting many places every day, a lot of them including government sites that were undoubtedly boring for 13-year-olds, but also from the overbearing stimuli. It was loud with constant car noises and the chatter of everyday life. It was busy with so many different people weaving between the crowds to get on with their day. The smells were a lot stronger as well, and by the end we all just wanted to go back to our quiet and familiar town. Every school holidays, a bunch of us would go to various towns around us to spend time with the other kids. They were generally either similar sized or even smaller than Edwardstown, but we would have fun playing in the rivers or getting up to mischief in the few local cafes. I remember meeting some kids who were very excited to finish high school and leave their town. They found it boring and depressing and wanted to enjoy the city life like a normal teenager. This was common among the towns we visited, but for whatever reasons, most kids from my town, including myself, were content. There could be several reasons for this, of course. We were lucky and rarely had issues with water as other towns had, and we had a good-sized town that was never too quiet nor too crowded. We also all got along well and shared a great community spirit. We were always there to help and support each other, I'm sure there were plenty of issues still, and I may be looking back far too nostalgically to be completely accurate, but I remember the good always outweighed the bad, which is why I always knew I'd stay. Currently, my wife, son, and I still live here. It's certainly much quieter than it used to be. We had an influx of tourists for a few years after, of course, all wanting to see if they could also see the giant words spread out through our houses and buildings. No luck, of course, but it was still an attraction for a while. We don't get many new people moving to town, and unlike when I was younger, a lot of kids do decide to live or study elsewhere. I can't blame them. It's still a great place to live, but it also labels you. Many kids want to escape the hysteria their parents lived through. My kid isn't old enough to worry about it now, luckily, but I'm sure the time will come where he will want to leave as well. My wife and I will stay though. Whatever happened in 2008 meant something, and I want to stay in case it ever happens again. I've danced around the actual event a lot, sorry. It's still very awkward to talk about to an outsider, let alone sending it to you to read to many others. But it's time I share exactly what we saw. It started in June 2008. It started at the end of 2007 when the local government decided to build radio and cellular towers around the outskirts of our town. We were centre to a lot of other towns, so it made sense to put them near us. A group of townspeople petitioned against it. It would create disturbances in the town with both the construction materials and noises and put a strain on the town's resources. The reply to that, of course, was that it would boost the local town economy, not hinder it. I vividly remember my favourite cafe would always run out of food quickly because the workermen would buy it all up. The petition didn't work, and to be fair, quite a few people were excited at fast internet and cellular. Being a country town, we were often not considered when the towers were built. My dad was extra excited at the radio opportunities that would come from all of this. So the work took place. It created a bit of strain on the local places, especially food-wise, but once the owners got used to the extra supplies needed, they started turning a higher profit. It was certainly weird having so many unknown people around at first, but we got to know the recurring men and women, and my parents actually made a few friends. Life continued on, and we all worked around each other. I continued school, and we slowly saw the towers come to life, starting from the foundations in the ground to then slowly rising into the cloudy sky. The first day it happened was June 1st. That Sunday, I awoke late, as any teenager does, and left my room to find my parents. They had left a note saying they were at the local cafe, so I shrugged and ate my breakfast as usual. I finished up and left my home and made my way to the cafe. It took a moment for me to see it. I was distracted by so many people crowding around the cafe as they quietly whispered to one another. I squeezed past them all to find my parents, and I spotted my mum and her red hair quickly. Making my way to them, I saw both my parents were looking up at the cafe. In large capital letters, the word "advancing" was painted in white above the shop's windows. While we were a close-knit community, people still did bad stuff. Graffiti occurred every now and then, kids tagging or defacing something for the fun of it. This seemed different though. The words were perfectly lined up as if it had been printed directly onto the building. The only clue it was paint was the texture of the brick coming through the letters. It was unnerving. I think if it had just been that one time, we would have moved on and rationalized it as we often do, but instead it happened again, and again, and again. The next time was outside the carpentry store and was once again in the perfect white font. It read "Wavelength." The day after, outside on the main school building, was written "The Strange Are Me." Some of my friends thought it was kind of cool. They assumed some rebel kid was using a stencil or something to essentially play a prank on the whole town. I couldn't find the amusement though. Every time I walked past those words, my hair stood up on my arms and I felt shivers down my spine. After the school defacing, the neighbourhood watch got volunteers to keep an eye on the main buildings throughout the evening, but they were never able to catch someone doing it. It was either poor timing when they missed the culprit or a really sneaky person. Or maybe there was no one to catch. After a week straight of this, with the latest sentence on the outer museum wall saying "Obsession encourages the small law enforcement in the town reached out to the largest city police to come investigate. By this point, most kids were kept inside by their parents, both to make sure it wasn't them doing the graffiti, but also from the fear that was slowly taking over. At this point, I didn't think it could get worse than the huge disruption the words had caused, but it did. I wasn't there when we first realised what was truly happening, but was told by my mum as her voice trembled that afternoon. The city police came that morning to investigate and was shown around to the various defaced sites. Jonah, our local sheriff for lack of a better term, explained how whoever was doing this had to be stopped. The policeman frowned and shook his head in confusion. He said, "Mr. Robin, as I mentioned before, can you please show me where this graffiti took place?" They stood right outside of the school. Jonah could see it perfectly, the straight line of words painted vastly over the building. The policeman could not. And that's when it truly began, a week and a half through June. The people of Edwardstown could clearly see those sprawling words throughout the town, but no one else could. I don't remember the next week too well. I couldn't believe that they couldn't see the graffiti and how the policeman thought it was some kind of joke. They brought more people from the city in and it was always the same thing. They couldn't see what we did. We tried photographing them, of course. Most people had crappy cell phones which could barely capture the buildings, let alone the font. But a few people had digital cameras. It was the same though. We could see the words on the photo, but others couldn't. This continued on with more words appearing. The local barber had pull, not push. The small vet had coming. The grocery store had understand you. 3 weeks into June, the terms mass hallucinations and hysteria were suggested by specialists who had visited and were also unable to see the text. Let's talk about those terms quickly. I hadn't heard of it back when this was going on, so I looked it up online. Of course, I've done more research now that I'm older, but to briefly explain. The term used most often is mass psychogenic illness, as there is usually a physical element to hysteria. The most common are headaches, dizziness, and nausea. While we certainly had a few of those symptoms, it mostly was an offshoot of the fear and anxieties we felt. A hallucination is to experience the apparent perception of something not present, which is what the specialists eventually went with. There is all kinds of hallucination varieties and information out there, so go down that rabbit hole if you feel like it. You've probably heard of a popular case called the Dancing Plague, where in 1518 people had the uncontrollable urge to dance non-stop and ended up pushing themselves to literal exhaustion. The plague had claimed over 400 victims, and yet no one could work out why people were compelled to dance. Of course, there were many religious reasons suggested, being the 1500s in France, but it was still an extremely odd occurrence. More specialists were brought in to thoroughly check the area for anything that could be causing us all to hallucinate, and as I mentioned, they ended up blaming the radio tower's construction. Throughout this period, the workers continued to put up the towers. Interestingly, only about a handful of them could also see the text. We later found out that the men who stayed in town more than half the time because the commute was too far were the ones who saw it. This again was explained that because they had more access to the affected water, they also fell victim. And so, you mostly know the rest of the story. It happened quicker than I thought it would. Construction was halted and the water was purified. And then, on July 6th, 5 weeks after the first words appeared, the final workmen left and the half-built towers were left abandoned. That morning, the words had also abandoned us. The digital photos taken during that time showed only the buildings, not a word in sight. All were gone. Well, except for one sentence, but I didn't know that until a little later. I remember my dad's frustration at having to now tell the city police that they were right and the words were gone. You have to understand, it all felt so real. We couldn't comprehend that others couldn't see the stark white writing. Once the official report had been made, the town continued on. It was very tense for a few months, waiting for those words to come back, but they never did. And while it was frustrating having so many strangers visit, it helped keep the economy alive as they had gotten used to the constant flow of workers. It must have been a year or so after these events that my best friend and I were hanging out on a bored weekend day. We had looked forward to better internet speeds to browse online, but with that loss we had no patience for how long it took to load a web page. I don't remember which one of us suggested it, but we were reminiscing on the text when we decided to sneak by and check out the towers. They had been heavily blocked off. While they were generally sound, they were still only half constructed and may not be the safest place to explore. I guess it was too expensive to tear them down, so they were just left there to age away. It took a good 20 or so minutes to walk there, and we did find it fenced off. We were both slim kids, so we managed to pull apart some of the wide fences to slip through, and found an old door through to the centre working area. Luckily for us, the rock had rusted and we were able to knock it off with a loose rock. We made our way in, and I'm sure we looked around, but I don't quite remember. The sole memory that takes over is when my friend and I got to the front section of the tower. There was a board that was being used to hold the scaffolding together. In stark, straight white letters, the words "Help Enter" was painted. I'll never forget the adrenaline rush as my eyes swept over the words and quickly checked to make sure my friend could also see it. He was wide-eyed with his mouth popped open. We hightailed it out of there and practically ran home. We never said anything. We had made a silent promise to never bring it up to anyone, both from worry that only the two of us would be able to see it, but also from the fear those words brought us. I don't know why I felt the need to share this story with you. Eventually we got better internet services and I tune into your show every now and then. If anyone will believe me in my experiences, hopefully it's you and your listeners. Someone mentioned sending in a story to finally get it off their chest, and I feel like that's also part of my reason for finally saying all of this out loud. Some people who also experienced it ended up believing in the report. Others agreed that the only reason we all saw the same words was because of the Mandela effect. We fed off each other's confusion and misremembered it in a consistent way. I don't blame them, of course. It's easier to apply logic and reason we can understand and move on. I personally still believe in what happened though. And while the text stopped appearing when the construction stopped, I don't think it was the now clean water that halted the words. Whatever actually happened in 2008, I don't think we will ever know the complete story. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Wow, thank you for sharing your story with us, Liam. It was a fantastic read, and I'm sure the listeners will be thrilled to have a first-hand experience with the Edwardstown's hallucinations. Oh, the temptation to reach out and ask more questions is there, but I respect you have shared what you wanted to. I just wonder more about what was actually written. Why those words and phrases? What is it even referring to? I guess you were right. We may never know the true reasons as to why that happened. Oh, Rowan is tapping on the glass. Everyone say hi to Rowan and tell him he needs to get a haircut, please. His long dark hair is making him look like he's going through another emo phase. Oh, it's another letter. It must have only arrived today. Perfect timing. It's from Liam. It says, "Hi Charlie, sorry for the extra letter. I forgot to mention this in the original story, but there was a fellow in town named Arthur who was pretty anti-technology and would often argue how older methods were best." He had a few film cameras and had actually taken a photo of the school building while the words were active. In his youth, he had his own darkroom where he would use an enlarger to print his works, but as he grew older, he couldn't easily afford the chemicals to be shipped into the town. Unfortunately, he passed a few years back and his son was going through his belongings looking at the various film strips Arthur had accumulated. And his son, Alan, my best friend who had been with me when we visited the towers, sent me an image. Sorry, the quality isn't great. We don't have the best scanners here, but hopefully it's clear enough to see. Thanks. It took me a moment and a bit of working with the light, but I finally see what you meant. Geez, even I can feel the hairs lifting on my arms. Head over to finelinestation.com if you'd also like to see the image. I'll try uploading it there. This has been another broadcast by Fine Line Station. I'm Charlie Fox, and I'll speak to you next time.